You gotta fish slow during the winter. At least that's what I've always been taught. All the way back from the 70s, 80s, 90s on up till now. This is what we've read, we've heard. Other anglers have taught us this. It's just what you have to do in the winter. Fish slow. Fact or fiction? That's going to be the topic for today. You guys hang out. We're going to get into it, see what we can come up with. Sure, there are times we are going to need to slow down our presentation. We're going to need to fish slow, take our time. But do we need to fish the entire day at a snail's pace and painstakingly cover every inch of the bottom? I don't think so. Now, what would lead me to go against all of the top dogs, so to speak, in the sport that went before us, that have taught us this? Let's get into that. The big names: Bill Dance, Hank Parker, Roland Martin, Orlando Wilson. All these names come to mind, and I distinctly remember them telling me when I was younger, I've got to slow down. I've got to slow down. What would lead me to believe that I don't always have to slow down? Well, for one thing, let's consider the baits that we use now that are considered wintertime baits. A blade bait, slab of metal, you rip it off the bottom, flutter it back down. A jerk bait, crankbaits of all sizes, shapes, forms. These are not slow baits. So that whole idea that you can't catch a bass unless you just crawl something around really slow, that doesn't fly anymore. It's kind of gone by the wayside, that way of thinking. There will be times to slow down, but that's not the only way to catch a fish. And my way of thinking has had to change as I look over the course of time. And my way years back, I would have never picked up a crankbait, a spinner bait, a jerk bait, any of those for the winter time, because I had been taught you got to fish slow. Times are changing. Now, don't get me wrong. A worm, a jig, they have their place in the winter. By far, they are tried and true and some of the best cold water baits out there. But if you can get a bite on a faster moving bait that will allow you to cover the water column and cover more ground, cover more area, you're going to be more successful. Yeah, the averages just fall in your favor when you can cover more water, cover a bigger amount of ground, and put your baits in front of more fish. It's just the law of averages. Crawling a worm or a jig over let's say a spot that's 50 yards wide, it might take you an hour or more to crawl that bait to where you could cover that same amount of area with a crankbait, a jerk bait, or a spinner bait in just a few minutes. So overall, if we spend all day in one tiny little area and we pick it apart with a worm or a jig, sure, we might do good. But think of all that water that we did not cover and all the fish that we missed. That's where I missed out for so many years. Now, if you're like me, for all these years that I've been fishing, my problem in the winter, not only was I stuck in a rut of throwing a worm all winter long. That's all I knew to do. I was taught to fish slow. The worm was my favorite thing to throw, so I fished it. Those fish are not always near the bottom. Different conditions change. They'll be mid-column. They'll be somewhere else. They'll be closer to the surface at times. Even there in the middle of winter. That worm wasn't anywhere near a fish. So I would go trip after trip sometimes. Big fat zero. That's a horrible feeling when you fish all day. You really go after it. You're just doing the best you can do. Big fat zero. Um, until I began to learn, uh, I had a lot of those trips over the years. Now, how do we know what bait to use? How will you know what bait to use? When you pull up to the ramp, you look out at the water. Man, what do I use? It seems like such a daunting task to figure out and put a puzzle together all of a sudden, but it's really not. Your first thing, and this is what I have to remember sometimes. Sometimes I just hit the water and I go fishing and I'm just having fun. But when it comes down to being serious, you've got to start eliminating water right off the bat, right there from the ramp. You have to watch what's going on around you, what the water looks like. There's a lot of variables that go into all these different choices. Water clarity, water temperature, is it windy, is it raining, is it sunny? All of that plays into what I'm going to do and maybe what you should do. It may make us choose a different bait for that day. But the very first advice that I can give you is, and this is something that so many other, well, I'm not a pro, but so many pros have talked about: fish your strengths and match your strength, something that you have confidence that you can catch a fish on, with the season and the conditions that you're faced with. Now, if it's windy out and the wind's blowing 15, 20 miles an hour, a drop shot might not be your best deal. You've got to fish a bait that you can control and that you can deal with, and that will also be that will work. But eliminating water should be your first goal. And once you begin that process, your puzzle's going to start to be put together. Now, when I first hit the ramp in the wintertime, I want to begin to look around just as soon as I make my first paddle stroke out away from the concrete. I want to, and a lot of it will come back to experience. And if you're new to fishing, every time you hit the water, you're going to build on that experience that you have in the past. I want to look for areas that I know wintertime fish should be on. That doesn't mean they're always going to be there, but that's where I want to go first. I want to find me a ledge. I want to find a point, a ditch, lay downs, standing timber. I want to find the first things that I think will hold a group of fish, and I want to go there first. I don't care if I have to run 15, 20 minutes down the lake with my little motor on my kayak, or paddle across the lake, or I may start right there at the ramp. And I want to match up my conditions with a bait that I feel confident in. If I pull out on a ledge, for instance, there's ledges. I fish the Duck River a lot. I'll use it as an example. It has a good amount of ledges, and I want something that, like a spinner bait, a shallow diving crankbait, that I can work off that shallow part of the ledge, bring it out over deep water. I want to let the wind help me. As much as possible, I want that wind to take me in the direction down that I'm trying to fish so I don't have to fight it so hard. A crankbait, and that doesn't mean you have to blister it back in, but you just have to bring it in at a steady pace, stop it, start it. You may vary your cast or whatever. A spinnerbait works at times. A spinnerbait has other attributes that I like in the winter, and we'll get into that in a minute. And but something that you can work that ledge with, if that's not your thing, if you're not a ledge fisherman. Let's say you want to fish laydowns, and you're a worm guy. Well, if that's your strength, work and go to the first one you can find, fish it, but don't spend all day. Fish them down the bank. Hit as many of them as you possibly can. 4, 5 laydowns down the bank. If you have not received even a bite, it's time to change gears. Let's do something else. Maybe go back up that bank. If that wind is helping you carry down that bank, maybe go back up that bank and come back down it in between all those laydowns. Bring that crankbait out. Work that area until you have eliminated that area. If there's nothing doing, let's go find something else. Let's don't dwell on, well, they should be here. I caught them here. You can't go by what we did last week or last month. If they're not there, they're not there. But now if you get a bite, you sock that away up here and say, hey, I got that bite 2 feet off the end of that tree. Go on to the next one. Work that tree, but remember where you got these bites. If it's up near the bank, if it's midways of the trunk of the tree, if it's out in the where the tree hits the open water, remember that those are your target areas from that point on. Just like ledge fishing, if you're bumping a crankbait down that ledge and it's hitting the bottom and it's getting hit, then you can work that ledge. But now if that bait comes off that ledge out into open water, that's where you need to expect your bite from then on. If that's where you're getting bit, when that bait breaks free of that ledge, chances are there's your school of fish. They're holding off the outside of that ledge. It's a puzzle that it's a fun puzzle for me to put together. It's frustrating at times, but it's a blast when it starts to click up here and you say, man, that's 2, and then there's 3, and then there's 4, and all of a sudden you realize, man, I've caught 10 or 12 fish. Here we are in the middle of January versus maybe last year when, oh God, I hate winter fishing. When that clicks in your mind that you have put that together, there is not a better feeling. It is for a fisherman to put it together and to know that we put it together and then we're working that pattern. It is an awesome, awesome feeling.